Coming up next,
The Bookening reads
the Odyssey. This is Nathan Albertson. In honor of Homer, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to let the muses flow through me today. I'm not going to use any of my normal shtick. None of it. I'm just going. The muses are going to speak through me. I'm going to come up with completely new stuff on the spot. First time Bookening history is going to be made. So my name is, nope, I'm not even going to say that my name is Nathan, because that's what I always say. I'm going to say the person that's talking to you right now, well, his name is Nathan Albertson. He's a guy that speaks on podcasts about books, like this one, The Bookening.
Whoa.
And he's joined by, this is hard without my shtick, Brandon.
Yeah.
My shtick is helpful.
Feels really weird.
When I was doing my shtick, I'd just be like, but instead I got to come up with new things. Over there we've got Brandon.
Yeah.
A brawny beast of a man.
Hey.
It's like old King Kong. Badder than old King Kong.
Badder than old King Kong.
Meaner than a junkyard dog.
I mean, we did establish I'm Thanos.
Yeah, we established last episode.
Jake missed that.
Jake missed that. We just established that Brendan is a purple space monster.
Oh.
He snapped his fingers. I don't know if you noticed half of humanity turning to dust while you were not here, but
Nathan failed to go for the
must have
head.
been driving.
I did fail to go for the head. So there's Brandon. He's a guy that
But somehow the heroes all survived.
somehow, well, not Spider-Man. Spoilers.
But the big ones,
yeah, all
The original Avengers.
The original Avengers.
they all survived.
Yeah, and presumably they'll be assembling. All right, so there's Brandon. Guy, he's a literature guy. He talks about literature. He provides context on our podcast. There's Jake. He's, a holy man. So I'm trying to think of synonyms for the things I
Like
usually
Rasputin.
say. Yeah.
Minister would work.
Minister, yes. He's the very reverend. No, not very, probably not very, because that's actually a specific title in some denominations.
That's right.
But you're
The
just...
very reverend is a designation?
Yeah, it's probably
Most
not for us,
reverend.
but Jake, he's the teaching elder that talks about literature.
True
He
enough.
does that.
Tell us about your state of
No,
being,
that's what
Jake.
that's what TE actually stands for. My state of being.
Yeah.
I am here.
You're here. You've enjoyed some baseball with your son. Understand
Yeah.
he pitched a couple of innings and then,
Yeah, I pitched 2 shutout innings in a tie, actually.
I don't know what that means, but presumably our listeners all love baseball, Mama, and American Pie. Not the film series American Pie. We're not that kind of podcast.
I am assuming that's what everybody was thinking. I'm glad you clarified.
Why did I even say American Pie? I should have meant apple pie.
Bye-bye, Miss American Pie.
I drove my Chevy to the levee, but
The levee was
it
dry.
was dry. It was completely dry.
What were the good old boys doing down there?
They were drinking whiskey and rye.
Yeah.
Right.
You think this will be the day we die?
This could be the day we die.
I think it will be.
Yeah. If I snap again.
Yeah, if you snap again, then that's the other half.
How did Thanos not know that he would be one that would disappear?
I think it was in his snap.
Yeah, okay.
I think he snapped in such a way that it wouldn't be him.
I got cornered today and given some big picture theory about Avengers. Pretty good theory.
Cornered it by someone we know?
Yeah.
By a random riot of people with torches and a...
I need to tell you something about Avengers, random guy.
Some homeless bum on the street.
Is this somebody
No,
we...
I was walking between baseball games and I ran into a friend and he said, "Hey, I'm going to tell you my take on Avengers. Infinity War was everybody failing. The gods failing, the anti-heroes failing, and the patriarchy failing in Tony getting the closest. And now we've got Thanos, the ultimate patriarch who won. Our last look is at what it's going to take to bring down the patriarchy. Captain Marvel.
A woman...
Feminism is what's going to save the universe."
It's possible that they do that, but that would be very unsatisfying for most people.
It is Disney.
Yeah.
They did do this exact same maneuver with Star Wars.
The Star Wars.
If he's right, I'm going to be so angry.
I don't think he's right. I think
can't be.
Marvel's...
They're
I
too
think
smart,
I think they realize that it's unsatisfying for us to see a hero we haven't even met yet take out the big bad of 10 years. We got to see one of...
While all the heroes that we love feudally fail.
I mean, if they wanted to do feminism, they could do Natasha and Gamora, and they could have a chick strike the killing blow, but it can't be some chick we've never met.
Well,
that's just not good storytelling.
And also
they
the
got to
fact
introduce her to us.
Doctor Strange seemed to know what was going on, that this was the right path. maybe it was you guys on the second take, but I think whoever made the point that the next movie will be a Captain America movie.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
And the Russo brothers
And
have
I think-
said the next movie will be a Captain America movie, and their apology for this one not being.
No, I think that it's going to be a Captain America movie setting up the fact that Captain America will be the one to make the ultimate sacrifice.
Right.
I think he's the only guaranteed death.
I think you're probably right.
Yep.
I bet they do a good job. Donor shout-outs! Yay!
Well, there goes those theories.
Now, Jake, you missed it last time. We did, which means you should probably have to do the same thing we did and do it for all 10 of these.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
See if he does a better job.
See if you do a better job.
Got to get inspired by that muse.
Yep.
Okay.
Sing to us. Sing to Jake, O Muse,
Inspiration.
in the form of iambic pentameter.
Uh-oh.
You are going to shout out our shout-outees.
That's pretty rough.
He could do hexameter this time.
That's true. You could do
'Cause that
hexameter.
is Homer's chosen form.
Yep. Homeric hexameter.
You get 12 beats. 12.
Is he going to do iambic hexameter?
It's usually dactylic,
Sheesh,
isn't
guys. What are you trying to do to me?
it?
I'm going to have to work this out with pencil.
We'll stick to
Paper.
iambic. Here, Brandon will show you
Just
how
do
it's
blank
done.
verse.
Brennan,
Yes.
show him how it's done with some iambic pentameter, my friend, for
Uh-oh.
Lily of the Valley.
Oh, how are you, sweet Lily? Oh, Valley.
Perfect.
There we
Brilliant. All right, Jake, do us some iambic pentameter for Andrew and Esther and little baby Timothy.
We didn't bother with the iams in the end. Just get the 10.
We may have just
Andrew
get
and
the 10.
Esther, the lovebirds and son.
Andrew and Esther and lovebirds the son.
Yeah, you got it.
The
backwards, but
love-
that
The lovebirds and son.
Andrew
Hey, man,
and
you
Esther,
made that look
the
easy.
lovebirds and
I think we
son.
suffered with that one.
Yeah. No, Jake's a regular Billy S.
Oh, yeah, he's a good poet.
And son.
We're like a Christy M or something at best.
Yeah, at best.
But he's a Billy S.
He's a Billy S.
Brennan, give me some. Or no, I'll throw myself in the ring here. Jenny Z, inscrutable Jenny. Thanks for the cash. There we go. Who's Brandon's up? John and Jill and little baby Max.
I thought he was doing all these.
I decided to have mercy on him.
John and Jill and sweet little baby Max.
I lost count. Say it
No,
again.
that's 10.
I don't know if that's really iambic, but
No, it's not
suppose. Jake, give us some iambic pentameter for David's Mighty Men Transport.
Is David's Mighty Men Transport going to allow me to do that?
Sure. Oh, David's Mighty Transport.
No, none of these
Men
are
Transport.
iambic. Don't worry.
David's Mighty Men Transport's just intrinsically not iambic, right?
Well, you can scramble it a little bit. Oh, David's Mighty Transport.
Inc.
Men. Oh, David's Mighty Men Transport.
Thank you.
David's Mighty
Okay.
Men Transport.
Thank you, David's Mighty Men.
Transport.
Yeah.
Transport, yeah. Port.
Oh, thank you,
Yeah.
David's Mighty Men Transport.
Oh, my beloved mother, Beth. Thank you.
There you go.
You got Maya.
Oh, Maya. Hey.
I think that's what we did last time.
Oh, Maya, you're the best. Hope all is well.
So,
There's a little comment in there.
We got Jay and Katie who are cold and love cheese. Brandon, or whatever your name is.
Mine.
Jake?
Jay and Katie, who are cold and love cheese.
Seriously? Jay and Katie who are cold and love cheese.
Wow.
It's pentameter. I don't know about the iambic.
It's not. Well, Katie kind of messes it up.
Oh, Kate and Jay, you love that cheese. You're cold.
Oh, Kate and Jay, you love that cheese. You're cold. That works. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you, Brandon. I'm glad you think that was great. Whose turn is it? It's your turn. In fact. You get to do Benny and Dana. Tiberius.
Oh, Ben and Dana, how are you today?
Great.
There you go.
Jake, you got Nathan, not me.
Oh, Nathan, not Nathan. Thank you so much.
Oh, Nathan, not Nathan. Thank you so much. All right, that leaves me for Eric and Catherine, the Lovebirds, and unnamed future child. Oh, Eric and Catherine, I love you a lot.
Eric and Catherine, the lovebirds and child.
There we go. Jake's a poet.
Nice
Who's-
little dactyls there.
Brandon, you've got Professor X.
Professor X, you're so mysterious. That works.
Sure. Should we give that to him, Jake?
Stretching.
All right, we thank our donors. Go to patreon.com/ I screwed it up.
Patreon.com/
The Bookening.
There you go.
And give us cash. Oh, won't you please? Yes, do.
We're really good at this.
We are great. We are fantastic.
forthcoming epic poem that we're writing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no! The guns are going off.
Are they?
Yeehaw! We've come to the part of the show, everyone's favorite part of the show. It's called Contextual Texan. Jake, what happens in Contextual Texan?
It's part of the show where Brandon comes out and gives us some much needed context for discussing the work at hand.
And the work at hand is
Homer's Odyssey. Or is it Homer's Odyssey?
Or is it? That's what I'm hoping to
That's
find
the
out.
big question. I guess that'll be the looming question over today.
The looming question. Take
So
it away, Brandon.
hopefully you guys are going to jump in and help out some.
Hopefully you're going to give us a hail and hearty yeehaw. I don't think we've got one yet.
Yeehaw!
That was so hail.
Was it hearty?
It was sufficiently.
Yeehaw!
There we go. Thank you.
Little cowboys.
Take it away, Brandon.
Little cowboys.
Little
Let's do it.
Yeah, no.
Well, we've got our pattern set, so let's just start off by talking about Homer, but wait, we can't. When we did our E.B. White context, we kind of had a digressing, weaving E.B. White style context. Let's, in honor of C.S. Lewis, let's go for definitions and defining categories and terms and all that.
Indeed.
Crud. Let's do that. Yeah. We actually liked Preface to Paradise Lost. I don't know if Jake, you haven't listened to the episode yet.
I haven't listened to the episode.
Because fun fact for people listening, the episode that you listened to last week was taped an hour ago.
Hours ago,
A scant hour ago.
So this is all back to back.
I got it in the mail like yesterday or the day before.
Well, we also scrambled our schedule up because, as we said last week, folks, we've got a big, exciting 100th episode, spectacular that we're working towards. I think you're going to like it.
Yeah, we actually weren't scheduled to do this for another 3 or 4 weeks, right?
We scrambled everything up because we wanted to give people the 100th episode spectacular that they deserve. But we still have not announced what it is, at least insofar as I'm playing a game with our listeners. But you can go to social media and figure it out very easily.
Always. That's a clue.
All right. So, folks, very easy to figure out what we're doing for the 100th. We've not been shy about sharing clues on social media, but I'm still not going to tell you what it is because it's more fun not to. But let's just say it's one of the most requested things ever, and it's something that we have interesting thoughts about, I think. So, anyway.
We'll have great thoughts about it.
Brandon, I'm sorry.
Back to Homer.
Yes, Homer, yes. Sing to us, Brandon.
Oh, let's do this. Do I have to do this in hexameter, the whole context?
Yes.
No.
Yeah. If you pay attention, folks, you will notice that Brandon's going to do, he's not going to draw attention to it, but he will. And you can chart it on a piece of paper. You can follow along. Brandon's going to do the next hour or whatever of context in perfect Homeric hexameter.
Yeah. So, Spiridanes in days gone by.
I knew it. Never fails.
Oh, let's do this. Okay, so let's start where we usually start. Let's start by talking about Homer, but that already gets us into the weeds because it's a big question with scholarship as to who is Homer. It's fair to say that if you're looking at literary history, you kind of have two figures that loom largely over all of the Western canon. You have Homer and you have Shakespeare. And these guys have been raised to the level of literary gods.
The third one, and arguably, Ernest Cline.
Brandon just shot Nathan. So, hey, Jake, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm okay.
Homer has had this huge influence over literary history, just like Shakespeare has had a huge influence over literary history, in the sense that almost every author who writes is in some way writing what they write because these men existed and told the stories they told.
Right.
So think about even the modern landscape. You've got Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? You've got the Avengers in some way exists because of the Odyssey. You have epic tradition has created these possibilities, these stories that we have today, such as, like I said, the Avengers. You have comic book storylines because you had epic poetry, and epic poetry had its roots and its foundations in the stories that Homer told. But you can't overstate the importance of Homer. I always get that wrong, I realize. But I
can't overstate it.
You can't overstate the importance of Homer, just like you can't overstate the importance of Shakespeare, right?
I think Homer, I'm going to try and overstate the importance of Homer.
Okay.
I think Homer invented the moon.
Okay, well, you just overstated the importance of Homer. Thank you. So apparently you can overstate my statement about not overstating the importance of Homer.
Hey, how about you can't overstate Homer's influence on Western literature and education?
Thank you, Jake.
Homer got in a time machine and went to Elizabethan England and wrote all of Shakespeare's plays.
That's probably true.
Not an overstatement. That's just a lie.
Yeah, that's just a lie. No, I think you're right. I think he is a Time Lord.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he is. He is Doctor Who.
It's actually neither a lie nor an overstatement. It's just a statement of fact.
Yeah. As we're going to find out, he wrote all of the great masterpieces of literary history.
Great.
We're all written by Homer. That is the Bookening's approved theory.
Ready Player One by Homer.
But just like, yes, Ready Player... Oh, no.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, but Homer's influence, you see it in every era of Western literary tradition. So the Romantics, they had Chapman's Homer, which was this translation that was foundational, and then one of them wrote a sonnet about looking into Chapman's Homer. Have you ever read this before?
Yeah, I think I have.
Yeah, I mean, this is a foundational romantic sonnet.
By Mr. Keats.
Yeah. You want to read it for us?
Yes. This is a poem called On First Looking into Chapman's Homer by John Keats. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, or been, I suppose is what he wants me to say, maybe?
Yeah,
I don't know.
probably.
Which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told. The deep-browed Homer ruled as his demance?
Yeah.
I'm not doing a very good job of reading this. Demence? Yet did I never breathe its pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Cortez when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon a peak in Darien.
Yeah.
So he just compared, for those who are keeping track at home, he compared reading Chapman's Homer to being Cortez looking at the New World.
Yeah, and I think this actually has echoes of what C.S. Lewis was saying about Homer. There's this sense of wild naturalness to Homer in the language that he uses, the repetitions that he uses, all these things that draw you into the epic so you forget yourself. But also it's this strange world that you're now a part of. And you get to see the adventures of Odysseus, both magnified, but also as though you're a part of it, right? And it's kind of what Lewis was arguing with with Paradise Lost. With this, you have Homer, the importance of Homer, but particularly the importance of Homer as he is translated. And that's always something we're going to deal with Homer, is the fact that, one, we have this character, and he really is a character in literary history that we call Homer, and then we have the translations that we have Homer through. And so the one that we used was...
Robert Fagles.
Robert Fagles. Is it Fitzgerald? Is that the guy?
Fitzgerald's the older one.
Yeah, he has an older one. And then there's another one.
There's the new one.
Yeah, there's the new one, which is actually pretty good. Someone recommended that we use that one.
Yeah, and we looked at it, and it was good.
Yeah.
But we stuck with the current standard for this reading.
Yeah, Fagles is tried and proved. A lot of people recommend him. A lot of people I respect recommend him. And we'll talk about translation here later. So Homer, both in the story that he told, the epic tradition that he started, or at least was a part of starting, and then the way that we have interpreted Homer and made him a part of the Western literary tradition, it's only rivaled by Shakespeare.
Right.
And so he's a big deal. And yet, like Shakespeare, a lot of people think that he never existed. And so that's the first thing we deal with is traditionally, like 1600s, 1700s, when we were in the classical period, the literary history, people thought they knew who Homer was. He was...
Can I just say...
Yeah.
Sorry, my brain took a long time to say this, but I think it's always worth repeating. The Bookening does not support Shakespeare truthers. Right,
No.
Jake?
True.
Gross.
Now, whether or not we're going to support Homer truthers is a different question.
I'm excited to find out.
What do you guys think? Where do you think you'll land, Jake? Do you think it matters as much with Homer?
I don't think it matters as much with Homer.
Yeah.
I can see myself being convinced that the Iliad was written by somebody different than who wrote the Odyssey. And
Well, spoilers. That's actually the respected and probably proven literary stance now, is that the Iliad and the Odyssey were not written by the same person. That the Odyssey was written later and in response to the Iliad, because it kind of has nods to the Iliad, but it's very different in style and tone.
well, it's just so much superior to the Iliad, in my opinion.
Yes.
That's intriguing.
But I tend to default to if you tried to pin me down, I'm going to say, well, Homer was a dude and he wrote both of them, or was the assembler of both of those.
Yeah.
I think my bias is always towards away from what do I want to say? My baggage in this is that my bias, my prejudice is always going to be towards great men. I like to read history through the lens, or think of history through the lens of great men, which is oftentimes a helpful way to think about it. I'm not saying it's 100% all the way, but when people start talking about movements or...
My bias is 100% against little men who make their place off of thinking they can parse distinctions among great men.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of Shakespeare truthers feel like, for example.
The same arguments that Shakespeare truthers use are the same arguments that are used to say that the Apostle Paul wrote maybe 3 to 5 of the epistles. And they're really inane type arguments.
He's using different vocabulary here than in the other one. Not like anyone would ever think of using a different style.
Style, tone, and vocabulary. Well, guess what? When he's writing to Timothy, when you write a letter to somebody you consider to be a son, it might take on a different tone and use a different vocabulary than you might have different ways of expressing yourself than if you wrote something to a church that you spent a couple days with this one time.
Not me, Jake. I'm famous for maintaining the exact same tone, the exact same style, the exact same, what was the other thing? In everything that I write or say.
Over the course of your entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nathan has never changed.
Decades.
No matter
Nothing
who I'm
changes.
talking to. You'll notice on the podcasts, I maintain the exact same approach and personality and everything consistently through all our podcasts.
Yeah, you've
because
never changed.
I'm a very uncomplicated human being, as we all are. Not. Or are. So.
Very straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
No irony.
Mm-hmm.
No sarcasm.
Never.
Never.
Nope. I don't adapt myself situationally. Whatever.
Yeah, so you like to look at history through the lens of great men.
Right. My bias, and I'm totally prepared for you to prove to me that Homer was 15 different women.
Yeah.
But if that's what you're going to do, Brandon. But
He's Captain Marvel.
Yeah. But my bias is always going to be towards, tradition says it was one dude who happened to be special.
I think that's I mean, it's not wrong to look at things that way. I think it's helpful. I think Shakespeare's Shakespeare.
Right.
And I don't like the truthers.
Yep.
But then the further we get back in history, though, like the Beowulf poet, we don't know who he was or if he was even one poet, right? We know that it was a series of oral traditions that were then combined, and maybe there was one poet who oversaw the combination and gave it life in this poem that we have today. Maybe it wasn't. We don't know. Mm-hmm. That's part of the problem. And where the issue arises with what Jake was saying with Paul is when we then try to take these issues that we have with like Homer and with Beowulf and then apply it to Scripture.
Right.
There, we're saying that God preserved Scripture and that these men wrote it, that Paul wrote the letters that he wrote. There's faith we bring to it that we don't bring to whether or not Homer wrote Homer.
Sure.
And that is one of the problems that I end up having with things like the classical movement is they seem to want to bring a lot of faith to the fact that Homer wrote Homer and that Homer was this inspired genius, like we think of inspired genius today, that then, is worthy of praise.
Adulation. Yeah.
Adulation. But I'm sure we'll get there.
Yes.
But we do have what people have historically thought of Homer as. They've thought that he was famously a blind bard.
Right.
And that he came from Ionia, which is apparently the central part of western seaboard of Asia Minor, which is Turkey. And so some even conjecture that if he was a poet who lived at some point, that he may have actually lived to see the Trojan War, which would have been in the 1200s. Because Troy would have been right over there in Asia Minor at that point. And really, we don't know a whole lot more about him. We know that a lot of the early poets in Greece, like Sappho and Pindar, but people like that were using Homeric-influenced images and lines and stuff in there. So he was influential even in early poetic tradition in Greece. And so whether or not he was a person or whether this was just tradition that carried over, we saw elements of early, what we call Homeric style in very early poetry. It wasn't until a little bit later when Athens and these Greek cultured spaces began to rise up that we saw Homer deified like he became. And so there were like temples built to Homer until finally in about close to when Plato and Aristotle would have been around, Homer became an essential part of the schooling system in the Greek city-states. Mm-hmm. And so he was looked at as fundamental to education. He was looked at kind of as their Shakespeare, been seen as a father of their language, as this guy who was inspired by the muses. We talked a lot about that with the Preface to Paradise Lost episode. Right. But he would have been seen as being this inspired bard who the muses gave this inspiration to, who had this ability then to sing beautiful, epic poems. And his language was seen as so heightened and perfect and beautiful that it was used as, they would have read it like people do in classical schools nowadays. They would have read it and then recited it and written it down and modeled their own writing after it.
But just to make sure the timeline is clear for people, Homer would have been, true or false, Homer would have been hundreds of years before what we think of when we think of Greece and we think of Athens and we think of Plato and Socrates and all these.
So the timeline's unclear. So if he did live during the Trojan War, then that guy who was, what was his name? The guy who found Troy.
Oh, the archaeologist?
Yeah.
I forget.
I think he said it somewhere where in the 1200s. It's agreed that that's kind of early. The Homeric poems as we have them today were probably written like in the 700s. Plato and Socrates, they would have been 400s. So late 400s, and that would have been the rise of the Athens city-states and all that. I guess to take another step back then, when we look at Homer, we think of like basically three periods in Greek history. We have the early pre-classical Greece. Then we have classical Greece. Classical Greece would have been Homer up until the point when Alexander the Great started his empire. After Alexander the Great starts his empire, that's called the Hellenistic period. And we don't really think of Greek literature and stuff in the Hellenistic period. So the flowering of Greek thought happened in this classical period, and it starts with Homer. And like I said, Homer was seen as this influencer of Greek education, of Greek rhetoric, of Greek poetry, all these things that we think of as flowering in Greece. Homer had a huge influence over it. But it's interesting because we don't really see instances of Homer being referred to as Homer until about the 400s. Even then, he may have been a created figure just in Greek culture, and people have tried to figure out what the name Homer means. Some think it actually means like he who brings order to the verses or something like that. There's this sense of mystery as to who Homer was. Nobody, but we have a created idea. I mean, you guys have heard before that he was the blind, right?
Sure.
He was blind.
Oh, yeah.
He came out of Ionia. He used Ionic Greek, and that was that's what he did, and he was inspired by the Muses. Plato refers to him a lot, actually, with respect. I believe in the Republic. I don't think he would have been one of the poets that would have been cast out of the city.
No, Plato's always suspicious of anything artistic, but
Homer he had some respect for. And so Homer was this huge influence even over classical Greek. But it's pretty commonly accepted that he would have been writing in the 700s, just so people know what also came out of classical Greece. You had this epic tradition, then you also had the tragedy, which was born in classical Greece, with like Aeschylus and Euripides and Sophocles. You had early comedy that was born in classical Greece with Aristophanes, the Clouds, and the Lysistrata. Would it have been Aeschylus who wrote the Oedipus Rex, or is that Sophocles?
I thought that was Sophocles.
It's Sophocles, you're right. And famously, Oedipus Rex is what would then give rise to Freud and those guys. He would give him his famous the Oedipus complex.
Yep.
It would also be the foundational text for Aristotle's Poetics, which would then reign supreme as the way that people understood poetry and catharsis and all this for years. So everything that was happening in classical Greece, the rhetoric that was coming out of it, the poetry that was coming out of it, would have a strong sway over Western literary tradition, and it still does. And king of all of these, if you had to declare at least two kings, would be Plato and would be Homer. Those are the guys that had the most influence. Well, maybe Aristotle.
Sure.
But Aristotle was just basically Plato with a twist. He's like 7-Up to Plato's Sprite.
The muses are flowing through Brandon.
Oh, yeah.
tonight.
Great metaphors. I have that horse by its tail. It's rotten.
Yep.
Jake missed that one.
Yep. Jake missed some great metaphors.
So,
Spirit Danes and Days Gone By.
Spirit Days and Days Gone By.
A needle pulling thread.
A needle pulling thread. You have any more you want to add?
I think those are the big two things that I think of when you say so.
Yeah.
Sorry.
A needle pulling thread. So that's Homer. There, we're done.
Yeah, okay, great. See you next time, folks.
Yeah. Well, that just gets us up. So that's who Homer was. But he's fascinating. So even the point is that even in early Greek history, he's a figure. He's like this deified figure that we don't really know. He's kind of like Socrates. We know Socrates through Plato.
Right.
But nobody actually knows who Socrates was. So we know Homer because he has kind of been created for us. Right. We have these traditions about who Homer was. We have these poems, which we imagine because of the way we look at art and stuff in Western tradition. We mostly want to see it as being written by great men, right? Like you said.
Right.
So we want to see it as being Homer, having written these things. And for a long time, that was the prevailing theory. Then finally you get into the 1800s and, a lot of trash criticism happened in the 1800s. That's when you get, is it Schleiermacher, who brought historicism to biblical criticism?
Yeah.
It's
He's the worst.
Yeah, no wonder that when Schleiermacher was doing his divisiveness with biblical...
They called it higher criticism.
Explain it to our listeners in a sentence or two.
Because it'll help. It's the exact same thing that happened with Homeric studies.
He was a part of the higher criticism movement and sort of a game changer because he was also sort of a popularizer. He stood right at the cusp of the higher critical movement his goal, his whole thing was, forget the historical facts of Scripture. Love is what really matters. That was part of like what he did.
Yeah.
So he's sort of seen as like the father of modern liberal Christianity because of that. But it's because he was standing at the crux of higher criticism, which was just this movement that really began in Germany with the goal of getting to the origin of the text and its original authorship, its original meaning, and its original historical context. And so just a lot of very arrogant people thought that they were going to overturn a millennia and a half of biblical scholarship because they were going to free themselves and get to the roots of things and stand outside of their own time and prejudices, which of course they failed to do. They failed to see that they were actually a part of a movement that was very proud in its rationalism.
So maybe open that up a little bit more because it sounds great. Get to the original meaning, see what the historical context of something is. What's wrong with that, Jake?
Nothing's wrong with that ostensibly, but what you have are these guys writing in the 17th, 18th, mostly in the 18th, and then a really strong push in the 19th century, who think that they're going to
sort of wipe the slate clean almost.
Yeah, they're just going to start from scratch. And they're going to understand what it was like to be a Hellenistic Jew in Roman times better than, guys writing in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries would. Yeah. It's just really ludicrous. They're going to try to reconstruct things like that. And that's where you get these guys looking so minutely at the New Testament that they say, oh man, the language that Paul uses in Ephesians and Colossians is really different than the language in Philippians and 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Oh man, that must mean that Paul didn't write both of these things. And then compare that to 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. Well, that's got a totally different tone. It's just that arrogance of just like, can you just step back for a second and recognize that you give somebody 20, 30, 40 years and a couple of different contexts to write to for different reasons, and maybe things he writes are going to sound very different. I don't know. Maybe we should just trust the fact that nobody in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries questioned Pauline authorship. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was a reason for that. Maybe there's a reason why it's come. But to step back and say, oh no, now me, alone in my ivory tower in Germany somewhere,
I finally figured it out for the first time.
I figured it out. I've pulled it out. Well, these are scholars that are part of this rationalistic, hyper-rationalistic movement, and they were incredibly arrogant in the way that they approach these ancient texts. Not just biblical texts, but other texts. Yeah. And that arrogance has just carried into modernity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's where you see like the debates about Eve being a warrior, helpmeet being warrior, and then you still see it is the way that liberals approach criticism. And so it can be useful, not, like you said, looking at finding the origins of things. It's not a bad instinct.
Sure. Right?
So I like Stephen Greenblatt, I mentioned him before as a critic of Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. His whole point is to get back to like the origin, to go and just look as much as you can at what was Elizabethan culture like. But the problem is the pride that's involved and the way that the textual criticism overturns everything else.
Yeah. I keep thinking of Chesterton's, tradition is the democracy of the dead. These people are people that place themselves above that and just say, to heck with all of it. I'm going to be the one that...
I had a professor in college who wrote a paper about his whole shtick was slavery and early Christianity. That was his deal. He had gotten a hold of some ancient manuscript that he found in a library somewhere that was a slave apprenticeship contract. And he found some elements in the slave apprenticeship contract. And he was able to draw, I think, really spurious connections between elements of a slave apprenticeship contract and Paul's letter to Philemon. And so Paul's letter to Philemon is a slave apprenticeship contract. Mm-hmm. And it's the total opposite of what you think it is. It's not some guy talking to another Christian about, here's your slave that ran away. It's a contract about how the Apostle Paul wants this guy to be his slave. Yeah. And
wonder of wonders, this guy was the first guy to ever put two and two together.
That's right, based on one document.
Everyone else found. Before then, for 2,000 years of scholarship was dumb. Nobody knew what they were talking about. But this guy, finally.
Yeah, he figured it out. He got to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
And I wrote a paper that undercut his theory, but I had to use a play like Cali Row. Yeah. That thing, some ancient dumb play thing.
Did he appreciate you undercutting his theory?
He read my paper to all of his classes and asked me to publish a paper with him.
Wow.
And offered to write me a letter of recommendation to Harvard.
Wow. So I guess he did then.
I mean,
Yeah,
yes.
he did. I said no.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep. And you took a microphone and you dropped it
And then walked out of the
and
class.
walked it out of the class and right into the Bookening studios.
That's right. And here we are.
And here we are.
So Homer, so the Schleiermacher stuff, it's important to understand where our criticism and our way of looking at the world, how it's shaped by the culture we're a part of. Because I think that so I made this point when we were talking about author and how we think of the necessity of separating text from author. And so we only look at the book, but we don't think about the author. But that's really a product of postmodern and this sort of cold new criticism that came out of World War II. That's not the way anybody ever saw it before then. And so we have that bias because it's a created bias. In the 1800s, they had this created bias that was going to give rise to guys like Schleiermacher, and that's the bias that through science we can conquer the world. That's like through observation, through reading text closely, all this thing. It's this progress of man. Science is going to win the day, and that science can help us understand everything. It gives us the perfect context. And so that's where we get the rise of the analysts who would then first start thinking, well, we actually, looking at these things, looking at the Homeric poems, it looks like they're very close to oral tradition. That's probably how it was handed down. So probably this is actually a conglomeration of other smaller stories that then got put together in a larger story, maybe by a poet, or maybe not. They might have just been compiled, and that's what we have today. And that's where the sort of Homeric, so this thing, and it's actually a big part of literary studies now for people who look at classical texts. It's called the Homeric question. And it's the question is, who is Homer? Was he a person? Did he exist? Was he this guy from Ionia or wherever it was? Was he from the Ionic coast of Asia Minor? Was he blind? Or was he this conglomerate of voices, right?
Same principles are also, just so listeners know, also behind what's known as the critical text of the New Testament of Scripture, which is what most modern translations are based on. Yeah. Very different than what, say, the King James is based on. By these scholars of the very similar school and way of thinking, compiling, deciding what they think is the actual text of Scripture that hasn't been added to by scribes over centuries, and gives pride of place, and not necessarily to the most consistent manuscripts, but the oldest and slimmest of manuscripts.
Yeah.
Because there's a conceit that things tend to be added over time instead of subtracted, and built up over time. And so that same thing applies to Homer. The idea is you probably started with something simple and short and sweet that got built up and edited and added to and refined over time as more poets assembled and built and added and refined, et cetera, until we have them somehow the monkeys at their typewriters giving us a masterpiece.
Yeah, so you have this, and then finally you have those guys, the analysts, and you opposed to them, you had these guys called the Unitarians, but they weren't like theological Unitarians, but they were guys who said, yeah, that probably is kind of how it happened, but eventually you get to the point, probably in the 7th century, 8th century BC, where there was this one genius who took all the traditions and then, was the Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein. He gave life to it, and he tied it together, and he pulled out the themes, and that is Homer. So Homer, he was adopting all these older traditions and stories, but there was a Homer. Maybe he wasn't the blind poet from Turkey, but he was this genius who then gave life to the poems. And that's the basic outline of the debate that even continues to today.
We're going to settle it for people?
I mean, I know which camp I sympathize with. I sympathize with there were the oral traditions, but there was someone who gave it life.
So Brandon, you heard it here. He's a Unitarian.
I'm a Unitarian. That's right. I actually just listened to it, but it's brilliant. I don't see how this could just be a conglomeration of things that were then thrown together.
Well, and structurally, it just makes the what do they call it? The telemachia, the first 4 books, they don't make sense as a thing on their own. They make sense as a beautiful setup for this story.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that even with all the production and stuff that goes into a movie, you still think of a director as an auteur, right? Because the great movies still have to have some Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein,
right,
that gives it life. even if there is a whole conglomerate behind it, there's still at least one visionary that usually spearheads it and gives it that final thing that makes it what it is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so I think that that's actually probably, I just used it right now. I wasn't thinking of this earlier, but probably the best analogy we have for what the Odyssey is and where it comes from would be a Hollywood movie. You have all these various parts that pre-existed, and then Homer takes it.
Well, and it could
gives life to it.
It actually probably should be a Marvel movie.
Yeah.
Because what you have even underneath in any movie, you have the writers, you have the screenwriters, you have the actors giving life, you have the team that pulls it together. But in a Marvel movie, you have a ton of source material going back for decades that you're drawing from to pull out the one definitive story of Thanos and the Infinity Stones, although it's been done and done.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the definitive story of Odysseus. They've all had these traditions. And even through the traditions, you've had the themes start to arise. I'm sure Wine, Dark Sea, all these things were in earlier poems. We talked about this with the Paradise Lost episode. But part of epic tradition that we would have in Greece, I need to pause again because I don't think I made it clear enough how important classical Greece was to literary. I said this, but I mean, I can say it again.
You got to drive it home.
Yeah, I mean, it was everything we think of as like literary tradition. Epic would give rise to the novel, right? The lyrics that were in early Greece would give rise to the poetry as we have it today, the sonnet, everything, form. All these things that we think of with poetry comes out of ancient Greece. Drama comes out of ancient Greece. Theater, which would give rise to movies. All these things. I mean, ancient Greece was the hotbed where it all started to grow. And so this is important. And so Homer comes out of this. To that point, it both makes Homer great because he's this genius among geniuses, but it also kind of puts him in context. It's like one of those periods that we've talked about before,
like Elizabethan
England, where it was just all the elements were just right to produce this fireworks of great art. And so that's what we're looking at. That's that period of history. It's just life and life and life. Philosophy as we have it today, philosophical thinking that would rule the Catholic Church for years and years, the stuff that would give rise to Luther needing to have the Reformation, came because of Thomas Aquinas was a fanboy of Aristotle, right? All these things come out of ancient Greece, this period we're looking at. So you really can't overstate its importance. That's a proper use of that. So where was I?
What did you interrupt?
You're Unitarian.
Yeah, Unitarian. I'm a Unitarian. Now, does that mean that I think that I'm actually sympathetic to the viewpoint that maybe Homer didn't write the Iliad? Or if he did, it was just like he gave it a pass and it was his first go. But the Odyssey is his masterpiece. You know, the Iliad's like his Titus Andronicus.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were going to
say. But the Odyssey is his Tempest or King Lear, right? I mean, or his Hamlet, I guess, is the one. Hamlet's not my personal favorite, but still, it's his masterpiece.
The Iliad is his Sugarland Express, and this is the Odyssey is his Jaws or his Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Exactly. Yeah. Seriously.
The Iliad is his beach poetry, and the Odyssey is his Ready Player One.
Hey. You guys are...
Whoa, yeah. The Iliad is Rubber Soul, and the Odyssey is Sgt. Pepper's.
There you go. Yeah.
Abbey Road.
Yeah, that's true.
What?
You're right.
I said Abbey Road.
And I was being a little bit mean to Rubber Soul. The Iliad is his Help, and the Odyssey is Abbey Road.
There we go. This makes it clear to everyone.
The muses are speaking through all three of us tonight.
Yeah, there we go. All these great metaphors and analogies. Just, I can feel it. It's electric.
Yeah, this is a hotbed of...
Yeah, this is our own little ancient Greece happening right here. So, yeah, I don't know where you guys fall.
On whether we're Unitarians or not?
My inclination for a long time, not that I have any right to an inclination. I'm not a Homeric scholar, although I love the word Homeric.
Yeah.
John Wayne once landed a punch that was Homeric, I think.
John Wayne had an evening that was Homeric.
That's right, it was a whole evening. It was the whole...
Well, the guy walks in and the bed is broken and he says, impetuous Homeric.
Yes.
The greatest line from any John Wayne movie.
That's right. That's what I was trying to call up. Thank you.
What's that guy's name? Darby O'Gill? And he's got some Irish name. But anyway.
But my inclination is very much the director, the movie director.
Yeah.
The unit, the
Jake's
guy,
a Unitarian.
We are Trinitarians, guys. But
right, we think 3 people wrote the Odyssey.
You're gonna confuse people. Did you know, by the way, the Odyssey is one of the 10 best books of 1996.
Yeah, we need to remember to
Time Magazine.
Brandon, I can't believe you overlooked this in our context. On the front of our book, per who?
Per Time Magazine.
Per Time Magazine, the Odyssey is what again?
One of the 10 best books of 1996.
Wow.
That is just very...
I was way
it says
off
that on the
in
front cover of my book. So
Time was feeling generous that day.
So anyhow, yeah, I really do think that probably the best explanation is you have a genius auteur, semi-auteur who looked at all the cheesy, crappy comic books of 28, 30 years and made a masterpiece of a movie out of it.
Yeah.
And maybe with a supporting cast and maybe not, but definitely the Odyssey says one guy who knew what he was about from start to finish. There's no place I'm sure there are people out there that have places that they would point to, like the Telemachus section versus whatever.
I think the best argument you could make personally off the top of my head is the dopey ending, the way it just kind of peters out with Athena.
Because Mark Twain didn't do that.
Yeah. Well, true. I didn't say it was a good argument. I just said it's the place where you could say...
I think the preface of Paradise Lost gives a good explanation for that. It was all just about the suffering and the fluctuations of time. There was no sense of, there's nothing it was building to. Right. Anyways, there's not a sense of good and evil, not a sense of great purpose and weight behind the...
It's pre-comedy and pre-tragedy.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think people want to read that into the Iliad and to the Odyssey, the things that would come later, and that's where C.S. Lewis is very helpful. So he was doing what you were, the bad devil's advocate, I guess, to Jake's Schleiermacher stuff, where you were saying, well, isn't that good, the origins? C.S. Lewis is good about that because he does paint you the picture of what it would be like without then getting into the cruddy, bad textual analysis and prideful stuff that comes with that. Even if he does end up losing himself in ritual and loving blood to sacrifice to idols and all that weirdness that he gets involved with. So you can go off the deep end that direction too. What are you?
I'm with it. Well, I don't care, actually. I don't care whether Homer was a real guy. It doesn't matter to me at all. If it was a committee, if it was a woman, if it was a parrot that heard a story.
Well,
it really doesn't matter. But
it was a purple space monkey.
If it was a purple space monkey or a purple space monster that snapped his fingers. But I do see the principal thing that struck me in reading it this time was the beauty and intricacy and brilliance of the structure.
Yeah.
And so I think those 12 books belong together, and some guiding hand put them that way. And this isn't just some cobbled together thing. It seems to me that there's a precision to the way this thing builds and the way it's put together, the way it doesn't just tell the story.
The way it's paced.
Yeah, the way it's paced, the way it flashes back. It's just a beautifully structured. It's very... I want to say modern because I want to selfishly attribute to us the ability to do weird pacing things like what Homer was already doing.
Well, it reads. It's a page turner, for goodness sake.
Yeah,
if we can do a little bit of baggage check, I come to this discussion having read this book I think 4 months ago. That's how stale, how cold I am coming to this book because I just had it. I had the time, and I thought, oh man, Odyssey's a big book. I might as well get started on it. And then
you devoured it.
I devoured it because it was fun. It was exciting. It was a page turner, and
it's very sophisticated in the way it does that. It's not like Beowulf. It's like he fought this monster, and then he fought this monster, and then he fought this monster. The Odyssey is like it starts in the middle, and then it flashes back, and then it does all these things to keep the momentum going. That it is very modern. It is very, it's Quentin Tarantino, if you want to think about it that way. It's... I don't know what the way to describe it is, but it's just very sophisticated.
It's what we see as modern, yeah.
Yeah.
People, I think, are surprised when they go to the Odyssey and it has those techniques.
Yeah. And it's stories within stories, and the way that it keeps your interest, the way that, if you told it in a linear fashion, it just wouldn't work. So you see art here. However it came to be, I don't think it's just a cobbled together hodgepodge.
I can totally see it being, meant to be performed over multiple nights, though.
Well, yeah, I think you see
for that reason, the stories within the stories serve, to be satisfying in themselves while still moving the major narrative forward.
It divides up into chunks, and there's parts that feel very mythical, and then there's parts that feel very, what's the word? I want to say dirty, but not dirty like in a sexual way, just down to earth and
gritty
and
grounded
manly
and
grounded and
real. If they feel like realist stuff. Yeah. And I think people are surprised, especially when I would teach this to students, when they would go and they would see that, wow, this is not what I was expecting. And I mean, it's the same with Oedipus Rex and stuff like that. It seems like theater today. Mm-hmm. It reads, I mean, Shakespeare was influenced by it, obviously. Yeah. So there's nothing new. Like C.S. Lewis was saying in Preface to Paradise Lost, we have all the old forms. And when people try to think they're reinventing stuff, they just find out actually it's been done.
Yeah.
Right. And so what we do is we take these forms, which are forms for a reason, because they're the way that we tell stories, right? These flashbacks, these beginning and media res, this structure that's, you guys talked about Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, all that. You see that here. In fact, he gets a lot of his stuff from looking at Homeric stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So the hero has to descend into hell, and then he has to descend back out and have his great conflict near the end, his denouement, and then all that stuff that happens.
Descending back out, by the way, I believe referred to as ascending?
Ascending. Thank you.
You just killed half of humanity.
No, I killed half of the half. Yeah. You got to be careful.
Keep doubling down here.
Snap with the other hand.
That is a problem Thanos runs into all the time. The poor guy, he hears a song, he wants to snap along with it.
Yeah, I wonder if he only kills half of the half, though.
I like to think so.
Yeah. Anyways, so this is the Homeric question. This is the big overarching theme and of Homeric studies even into today. Without a doubt, people look at the Odyssey, and we'll talk about the structure. I don't think that's part of the context here that we need to talk about the structure yet.
No.
But we talked about the fact that this is an epic with the C.S. Lewis episode, but just again to recap, it's not really an epic as we think of it today. A lot of that was given the weight and sense of purpose later. Like what we think of the Lord of the Rings. When you say epic, most people are thinking of the Lord of the Rings, right? That's what they think of today. That's not what the Odyssey is. The Odyssey, really, what happened to Odysseus doesn't matter in the end to Greece.
To humanity at large.
Right, because there's no real sense of Greece and the purpose of Greece. And like you would have in Virgil with the Aeneid, Aeneas, it matters what happens to Aeneas because all of Rome is riding on him, right? There's a heavy sense of duty and purpose there. That's not here with this. So it's just basically it's about a nobleman, Odysseus, because most likely the bard was singing to nobles in a court, or at least was singing at a festival where people wanted to hear about nobles, like in a tragedy, right? Tragedies are always about noblemen because that's what people wanted to see. They wanted to see a nobleman fall. Here they wanted to see a nobleman strive with these difficult situations and use his wits to get out of it. There's no sense of right or wrong. There's no sense of evil. There's no sense of anything other than danger that we know he's going to get out of. And the fickleness of the gods, the fickleness of nature, and how suffering is just the background for all of this. And how in the light of this, all you really have is self-glory and self-promotion. And that's what you get with Homer. You're not going to get much else out of that, which is why it's so interesting that he becomes... So he's a genius, he's brilliant, the guy who wrote the Odyssey, but whether or not the ethics we get out of it is something to praise is another question.
And we will spend a good deal of our next couple episodes talking about that, I think.
Yeah, he has been fundamental to Western tradition, to the educational system that we have up until fairly recently. And then you have the new movements that are trying to bring it back. We've looked at the way that how we look at Homer, both either as we create him or as he actually existed, whatever, how that shapes the way we look at the Odyssey. Another interesting question here is translation. The fact that none of us here read Greek.
Nope.
And probably very few of our listeners read the original Greek.
Jake, you read any Greek?
Because I've studied Greek does not mean that I read Greek.
Yeah, and so...
Your spare time, you just pull out some Greek and...
Even the Greek that I've studied Koine Greek. It's not classical Greek.
Follow-up question, have you seen the movie Grease?
No. Oh, Grease. Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was imagining some movie spelled Greece.
Yeah, Greece. My Grease wedding.
Talking about?
My big fat Grease wedding.
My big fat greasy wedding.
Oh, gross.
As if that movie wasn't already gross enough.
Yeah.
There's no way that I am profitably reading Homer in Greek.
Right.
There's a sense in which none of us have read Homer.
Yeah, and so that's the question with translation is that I've mentioned this essay before that I really like by Walter Benjamin. And I don't know if you guys have any of these essays in your life where you feel like maybe what you got out of the essay wasn't necessarily what the person was arguing.
Absolutely.
Yep,
but it was so helpful to you anyways.
I think it's a lot of things
I do that.
in my life.
I do that all the time.
Yeah, and so here's what I got out of...
I don't know how many times I've read an article or even a whole book and come to Nathan and said, I learned this great thing and from this essay, and then Nathan goes and reads the essay and he's like, I don't know that was actually in there.
Right.
Like, but hey,
but I love your point. It inspired
the point's great and it works.
Yeah, and so what Walter Benjamin, what I think what the point that I have created,
Right.
that maybe he said, maybe he didn't,
Right.
was that
You're like Homer. You're taking just
Sure.
the raw material that's
but it's been
given
really
you.
influential in the way that I look at translation. And so you have various camps of translation theory. And the problem that we have is that poetry is supposed to be, and I've said this a lot, poetry is supposed to work with the language and the culture that it's in to make a great poem. And so Shakespeare's sonnets, and this is like when I'm teaching students how to write poetry, you can't write a Shakespearean sonnet today. You just can't. You're going to seem like an idiot because we don't have Elizabethan English. You have American vernacular. You got to make that work with the sonnet form. And we talked about in last episode how great that is to actually struggle with the sonnet form to make it work with American English. If you can do that, wow, great. That's what a poet does. That's the point of poetry. And so then you have the question. So you have Homer's Odyssey. When you're translating it, are you going to try and just translate it word for word to just get the bare bones of what he was doing across? Or are you going to try and take what Homer did and then somehow make it have life in English, right? And if anybody goes back and listens to the Beowulf episode, they know where I fall.
Dynamic equivalence, that's where you fall.
Yeah.
Yep.
I love Seamus Heaney's
NIV.
Beowulf.
Yep. Brendan's a Unitarian that loves dynamic
right.
equivalence.
That's right. I love dynamic equivalence. Now, do I think that this is a proper way to approach biblical translation? No. And for people who can't figure out why.
Yeah.
Do we have to make that argument?
No.
Okay. I mean, it's very clear why you don't approach the Bible that way.
Right.
But why do you approach poetry that way? Well, because if you want to, because of what C.S. Lewis was saying with the preface to Paradise Lost, if we take seriously that Homer was trying to draw you into the poem with his images and his metaphors and then the rhythms and the language and everything to try and create this world for you that is different than like what lyric poetry does or the sonnet does or anything like that. If that's what he's trying to do, then you want a poet who is so in tune to that, a translator who is so in tune to that mission, who knows Greek so well, but also then knows poetry in like modern English poetry so well that they can then bridge that gap for us and bring life to the poem so that we can get as best a feel for what Homer was doing as we can. I like that theory of translation. I think that's why Pevier and Volkansky write the best Tolstoy, because I think that they can do that. They know Russian so well, but they also are such good prose stylists in English that they can then give us what Tolstoy was doing to the best as we know. What are the problems with that? You have to trust your translator.
Right.
Right. That's the big debate is, well, how do you know you should trust this translator? And so then you'll have translations of Homer. Maybe people have seen these before. They're just basically prose. And really, literally what it is a word-by-word translation of what Homer had.
Yeah, we'll talk about this more in Baggage, but that was the way I first read
And it's boring.
Homer.
Right?
Yeah, and it was just kind of plotting.
But then you get someone like Fagles, who has the ability to do both. He's a great translator, but he also is just a good writer too, and he can give some life to it, and it's very helpful. And I like that way of approaching translation. And it does mean that certain things are untranslatable. Like my understanding is that if you can't read English, too bad. You're probably never going to really know what it is to read a Shakespeare sonnet. And we can't read French, so we probably will never really know what it's like to read Baudelaire.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to know what it's like to read Baudelaire, you probably need to go learn French. Sadly enough, that probably means that I will never really know what it's like to read Tolstoy. But, life's that way. Sorry. And that's Benjamin. That is what I took from Benjamin's essay, is he has this idea of translation as being this moment in time where the translator can catch the vision of the poet best, can put it into the language that he's translating into.
Right.
And I've always been sympathetic to that mode of translation. Maybe it's just romanticism on my part. If anybody can put to death my romanticism, it usually is Jake. So let's see if he has anything to say. No, okay. Not really. He's never put to death my... What was fun about the Ready Player One episode is the fact that it knocks you down, and then you have to think, well, what do I actually believe? Then you dig in you get up and you realize, well, I actually believe that. Right. I just need to articulate better next time.
I guess Tolstoy sucks.
Yeah.
Ernest Cline's great.
I guess so. Yeah, that's right, Nathan.
I've gotten vibes that I've been in the doghouse of a lot of our listeners for that episode. I think
for
doing a superb job playing my assigned role,
you
which
did
is
a great
Defender
job.
of Ernest Cline.
You did.
For any listeners out there who feel like they want to be offended on my account, I actually laughed a lot when I listened to that episode. I thought it was hilarious.
But it did involve Jake taking arguably one of the greatest authors of all time, Leo Tolstoy, and trying to rub his nose in some fly-ridden garbage.
And
And doing a decent job of it.
Yeah, he did a great job. That's the whole point.
Saul Goodman, man.
Yeah, that's right.
It's all good, man.
It's all good, man. Yeah. Yeah, that's all I really want to say about translation.
Or my cousin Vinny.
Yeah. Yes. Jake, you sympathetic to what Brandon just said about translation?
Oh yeah.
Nathan?
There was a time when Tim Bailey was reading a lot about translation, and one of the things that stuck with him from a book called, I think, Is That a Fish in Your Ear? Something like that. Book on the art of translation, is that it's impossible for translators to not translate up because they're acting as mediators, and mediators always feel the pressure of improving or seeming to improve what they're working on because it reflects on them personally. And so we were just having a discussion about this. We have a large number of Chinese students in our church, and sometimes we have to have translators in pastoral counseling sessions and things like that if needs escalate above essentially our Chinese minister, and there needs to be more people involved. And the pressure in that situation to mediate for the translator is always intense, and sometimes you can catch them doing it.
Yeah.
But that pressure is always present, and the reason why Time Magazine called this one of the 10 best books of 1996 is because it was Fagles that they're praising. So you have to recognize that we are getting here Homer plus Fagles.
Right, it's a Robert Fagles
just
joint.
like when you're just like Beowulf, you're getting whoever wrote Beowulf, but you're getting Seamus Heaney.
Right.
And why wouldn't you want that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
And so is Fagles.
And you see the weakness when you get.
It's why you want to read the McNeill Battles version of Calvin's Institutes.
Yeah, as opposed to that horrible public domain one.
That's why you want the T.H.L. Parker Torrance editions of Calvin's commentaries, which were only done in the New Testament. But if rather than just the big brown encyclopedic stuff done by the Calvin Translation Society, you want the actual. It's because those guys did a better job of bringing Calvin to life. That matters. You're not going to go back and read Homer in Greek. You're not going to go back and read Beowulf and the Anglo-Saxon. So you need a reliable, trustworthy friend who's going to do a good job of giving you the sense of the poetry, giving you what's going on, and helping you understand why this has stood the test of time by making it live for you.
Well, that was the thing that I forgot earlier that I wanted to say is I hate when I feel, Jake just reminded me of this, I understand all translators are in some sense going to be translating up, but I hate when you catch them doing it. There's nothing more obnoxious to me. That's actually what I really like about the Tolstoy translations by Pavere and whatever her name is. Volkonsky, is that what it is? Which what they've specifically said is that the history of Tolstoy has been people translating him up and making him less vulgar and making him oftentimes in the older translations sound almost like a writer of Victorian drawing room stories. Yeah. And he's just not that. He's actually a lot coarser. And so they capture some of that coarseness, and it's really, really helpful. And I like where Fagles captures some of the brutality and coarseness of Homer in a way that the new one that Emily Wilson, maybe we could make a thing about it being by a woman. I don't know, but it smooths out things in certain ways.
Sure did seem to.
And it's good. It's a good translation as far as I could tell. I haven't read the whole thing, but it softens the blow of a few things where Fagles just makes it feel bloody. Yeah, people have actually accused Seamus Heaney. I remember us talking about this back in the Beowulf episodes.
Of reinventing Beowulf, writing his own poem.
And of softening. I mean, I love Heaney, and I'm not going to dispute that Heaney wrote a great poem, whether it's Beowulf or not, but people will argue that the actual Beowulf poem is much more bloody and crunchy and earthy and nasty than what Heaney's kind of lyrical Irish sense of it.
Some of that in there.
Yeah, he definitely made it a brutal action story. I remember it being compared to the Tolkien translation, which came out around the time we did that, which is actually much grodier. So, anyways, I'm not trying to attack Seamus Heaney. I love Seamus Heaney, but
Well, I'm sure the Tolstoy translation is good too.
yeah.
I can't imagine having Tolstoy and Seamus Heaney having written a translation and then try to write my own.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say, did I say Tolstoy? I meant Tolkien.
Tolkien, that's right.
Um,
That's what I meant too.
yeah. Yeah. Okay, we should be done.
Yeah.
Do we have an ending line? Say something funny, Jake.
Sorry.
Say something funny, Brandon.
We're just unable to translate you, Nathan. Sorry. We can't give you what you want.
Somebody should translate all of our podcasts into
Ancient Greek?
into British,
Mhm.
so our British listeners can.
Oh, no, we're really good at that.
Yeah.
Hi there.
Hello, Brad.
Hi. Hi, Brad.
Remains of the day wasn't what you thought it was.
the barbie?
Where does our friends overseas really love our accents?
Yep. Yeah, they do.
Pond.
We handled Brad's complaint in the last episode.
Oh, good.
So, yeah.
We really do put a lot of work and effort into this stuff. It'd mean a lot to us if you would take the time to not just rate, but review. And it'd mean a lot more to us if you take the time to go to patreon.com/thebookening and just sign up. Some of you have been out there and you've been thinking to yourselves, oh yeah, I should do that for a while. And it's not hard. It's really easy. $1 a month, $4 a month. You won't even feel it, but we will.
Mm-hmm.
And we will thank you from the bottom of our hearts. So
We certainly
go
will.
sign up and support the Bookening today.
And remember, you get us to $500. The Mysterious Phantom has guaranteed, I have it on good authority, to do a behind the paywall show. So
You'll want to
Everybody
hear
wants
that.
Brandon loves the Mysterious Phantom more
I
than
do.
just about anyone.
You mean Bradley.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've never met the Mysterious Phantom myself. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Bye, Brandon.
Bye, Nathan.
Bye, Jake.
Goodbye.
Bye, muses. Goodbye. Brandon's one of the muses.
Okay, Calliope.
Goodbye.